So some of these are with our title funds in terms of title classes. The success class refers to the 8-step process and planning. Some of it is special ed, some of it is our ESL students. We do extended day, and then of course with teacher development. So those are kind of our menu of options as we look at our students individually as to how we want to address their deficits. Our second goal is in terms of instructional leadership and development, and we consider all of our staff as part of our instructional leadership team. We have 2 teams beyond that. We have a leadership team for the building. It has about 19 to 20 people. We have 1 position we're filling currently. And that is a representation of all of our different staff. So the different curricular areas, the guidance area, our classified staff. And that team is kind of a decision-making team based on information and data. And then they facilitate subcommittees so that everybody on the staff has a voice in making decisions as a building. So we talk a lot about professional development. Within our menu, again, for professional development, we have our literacy coaching. We have a literacy coach, a special education coach, who works not just with the special ed inclusion teachers, but with the general ed teacher to make sure that that bond between those 2 teachers and how they interact in the classroom is strengthened for our students. We have a part-time math coach. We have the district has implemented Scholastic University, so we can recommend things to our teachers, again, differentiated based on their needs, and then some things that as systemically we see as a building that we need to work on. We have our grade level meetings, our learning log meetings, our PLCs. It's a little different this year without our school improvement dollars. We're having to find time to do that outside of the school day, so using staff meeting time, using some of the teachers' prep time. So that's been a little bit of a challenge for us, but I think we're managing. And then the training for administrators the district provides through the district office and then through TNTP, the IPS RISE evaluation system. And then our third goal, which is the one we're here to talk about today, is our data disaggregation process or 8-step process. So currently, I'm the only administrator in the building that's been trained in the 8-step process. We have a couple teachers that were trained, and this was back 3 years ago when Pat Davenport came in and did the initial training for the district. We did a 2-hour workshop this summer when we had our professional development week for the entire building. We had 98% staff attendance throughout the entire week during the summer, which I think signifies a significant buy-in from the staff in professional development activities. So we did do a 2-hour presentation, kind of an overview of 8-step for all of our staff. And the purpose of going forward with 8-step is to then build upon that. We did, because we have a working knowledge of 8-step, we didn't want to wait until next week or the week after to start the 8-step process, so we did start. We have grouped our students. We moved our students into those groups. We've provided curriculum for the 3 different levels of groups for those students to begin the work with their teachers on implementing the curriculum to, again, address the deficits for our students. And we'll be tracking that data. We go in the classrooms and monitor the instruction and monitor to make sure that those students are receiving those services. We have a 30-minute success period. That's when the 8-step process, the curriculum, is implemented. And that is 3rd period. It's across the board. Everybody's doing it. Some students are in the enrichment group. Some students are in a maintenance group, and even tiered down to some of our bubble students that could or could not. They could go one way or the other. And then we have our remediation group. And obviously those remediation groups are tied to the core or content teachers that are strong in delivering that instruction for those students, and those classes, of course, then are smaller than the other classes. Our next steps, the school board we're hoping we'll approve our vendor to deliver the professional development. I have 22 staff members who are on board to spend the first 3 weeks of fall break training at George Washington. So we are moving forward with that. I think you should know that I called 22 people in about 5 weeks ago and said, would you be interested in doing this? Would you agree to this? Would you give up your first 3 weeks of fall break? And I asked 22 people, and every single one of them said we're in. So I think that that speaks to the commitment and the buy-in from our staff, and I'm really proud of that. So that is our next step. Any questions? Yes.
Just with regard to Pat Davenport working with you, what will that look like? I mean, what will be the frequency in which she's actually interacting with you for the agreement that's going before the board tonight?
Good afternoon. It's afternoon now. Basically, what's going to happen is if everything goes smoothly this evening with our Board of School Commissioners, we will be having a monthly process check after this initial training and also follow-up visits from Pat Davenport or a designee from Pat Davenport's shop that will come in and do process checks to monitor our progress in the implementation of the program and also its effectiveness as it relates to student achievement.
Just a quick follow-up. We had quite a conversation last month, and the reason I'm asking is only because when Dr. Hinckley was here, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I voted for it in part because of knowing her reputation for this. I believe she was here speaking in good faith on behalf of the board, only to wake up and read the Star and find out something totally different. Was the issue truly only waiting for the new superintendent to be seated, or you mentioned everything goes smoothly? Mm-hmm. I'm asking, do we have a reason to believe it's not? I'm concerned about that.
Not at all. I believe that, and Dr. Farabee, I'm sure will be able to speak to that as well, but I truly believe everything's going to go well tonight.
Good question. I think what you touched on, obviously Dr. Hinckley worked really hard to work with staff on a plan for George Washington, but there were some questions from the commissioner, even myself, as a new superintendent, the one being responsible for fidelity of implementation. So we believe that there was time needed for me to get a better understanding of the model, have an opportunity to talk with Ms. Davenport, which I've done, and I think we're in a much better place in terms of my understanding of what needs to take place and how I can support implementation and the board's support as well.
Thank you, Dr. Farabee. And I'll be sure I've seen Pat work with Muncie schools and with Marion schools. I think you've got a couple other districts in the state that can really speak to that and affirm your decision. I think it's good news.
Yes, I had an opportunity to talk with some individuals in Muncie and across the state, and so I just wanted to have an opportunity to do due diligence with my research and study, and I'm very comfortable with the model.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we have the Gru Sheldrick presentation regarding the A to F report, which members of the board have received. It is our goal to finish up the first portion of discussion and do the consent agenda and then break briefly for lunch, just to get our box lunches, and then resume the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Ritz and members of the State Board of Education. I'm Bill Sheldrake. My colleague, John Gru, since we tag teamed on this report, we intend to both stand up here and tag team through this presentation to you. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about the report. What we would like to do is to go quickly through the analysis that we have prepared and talk briefly. I'm going to talk first of all about findings, and John's going to talk about recommendations. We'll try to keep that to 10 minutes and then let you ask questions so that we can keep the entire time to 15 minutes. And we would ask that the questions come at the end, because one of the things that happens is some of the findings, well, the findings and the recommendations are interlinked very, very closely. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you. I'll start. We were asked, as you all probably know, by the leadership of the Indiana General Assembly to take a look at a number of issues regarding the A to F system and its implementation for the school year 2011-12, and under the former superintendent, Dr. Tony Bennett. We did that. We had about 3.5 weeks to do that. John and I, who were not experienced in education policy, but had served the General Assembly in various analytical capacities, were asked to come back and share in this. And we were also, we had staff from the Legislative Services Agency made available to us. We very quickly asked LSA to work with the Department of Education staff under Superintendent Ritz, and they were very helpful in the analytical tasks that we had, particularly with the programming of that model, to just check out the model and see how it worked out. So we want to thank Superintendent Ritz and her staff for assisting us in that. We worked quickly to see how the model worked. We took testimony from a number of people, both former Department of Education staff, experienced educators from educational associations and educational groups involved in educational policy, and a number of other folks, just to try to understand the situation. I'm going to go through the findings very, very quickly here. First of all, the findings that I would share are that, and this finding has probably not received the attention that it should, but it permeates many of the other findings and our recommendations, and that is that the former Department of Education did not fully appreciate and take time for the technical difficulties in implementing a new standard of accountability and the metrics and model that go with that. They did not have enough technical staff. They did not spend enough time doing that work. The result is that there was not a transparency in the implementation of the model. Practitioners were not involved in discussions about the implementation of the model, and that colored all of the interactions and things that came afterwards. And we view that as a very serious issue, and one that we'll deal with briefly in our recommendations. Second finding that we talked about is that Dr. Bennett and his staff, although they made some attempts to have interactions with practitioners around the state, in the end, the reading was that they did not fully interact with practitioners and other groups around the state, and when they did, there was not an open ear to listen. And the result of that is that there was very little buy-in for the new model. And again, that colored many of the issues that came later. Finally, regarding the well-publicized changes in preliminary grades, including Crystal House, our analysis of the technical operations of the model are the following. First of all, the elimination of the cap on the elementary middle school subject matter grades was done, albeit very late in the process. It was properly done and followed the rule that was promulgated and passed. By testimony from essentially everyone, Dr. Bennett's staff was not up on how that rule was operating. Very late in the process, there was a mistake that the caps should have been eliminated earlier and were not. Secondly, the other issue that assisted Crystal House, we were given testimony from a number of folks. We also worked with the Department of Education that we found approximately 10 schools that had elementary, middle school, history. In other words, they had operated elementary middle schools for a number of years, and they were moving into high school. And as a result of moving into high school, they became a combined school. However, those schools did not have complete high school grades. And as a result of that, Dr. Bennett's and staff made the decision to evaluate and give those schools a grade only on their elementary, middle school grades. And that was the only grade they received. We found that to be plausible. That perhaps is not the only way that they could have treated that situation, but when they did it uniformly and without bias. Now, one thing that we would like to say here, and this colors our recommendation, making that finding does not mean that's the only way you could deal with that situation. And there are a number of things that should have been done to deal with that situation. And you'll remember in our first finding, there was a lack of transparency. In dealing with that situation, there should have been more transparency. We believe, and my colleague will forgive me since we've worked together for the last now 6 weeks. One of our recommendations is that those kinds of decisions, policy decisions about configurations, we would argue it's impossible to write a rule that covers every configuration that's going to come up as schools transition and move into various new areas. And as a result of that, we believe that this board is the right body to assist the superintendent and the Department of Education in making determinations about very difficult configuration changes like that. So that's a preview of our recommendation, but that's how we would see that finding, the results should have been dealt with. I think I'm going to stop there and turn it over to my colleague.
So I will turn to our recommendations, and we hope that our recommendations can inform the process of moving forward with the revision of the accountability system that's required by HEA 1427 that passed earlier this year. So let me begin with the disposition of the grades for 2011 and 12. We did find that there were 3 high schools that were awarded grades that were perhaps higher, at least in our opinion, that they should have been because a subject matter cap was eliminated for those schools, and we felt that the rule was clear on that. There may be some discussion that the superintendent and her staff would like to have with the board on that particular issue. We also understand that since we issued our report, the department may want to revisit the grades that were issued to some of the combined schools with incomplete high school grades. And once again, we would say that that type of discussion would be appropriate. I think, as Bill said, transparency going forward is one of the key recommendations that we would make, so that any determinations involving the interpretation of the rule that are necessary, as Bill said, it's impossible to design a rule that can cover 93 configurations of schools. So if there's transparent discussion and decision making, I think that will go a long ways as you proceed down the road. Regarding the reporting of 2012 and 13 grades, obviously we feel that the DOE and the board should proceed as quickly as possible with issuing those grades. We're already late for reasons that you know with regard to some of the problems with test results. But we also feel that there needs to be adequate time for vetting preliminary grades with the schools. There needs to be time for the schools to review their grades, to submit appeals, as has been the practice for many years with the department, adequate time for the department to review those appeals and then to make final determination on grades. Again, Transparency, we want to say that again. There will be, we're sure, situations where interpretations of the rules will be necessary in order to assign grades to schools. Again, those types of issues we feel should be brought to the board and publicized to not only the schools but to the public itself, so everyone understands the kind of decisions that were made. We also did make a recommendation that until the new accountability system that is required by HEA 1427 is implemented, there should be consideration in not taking over schools that are in their 6th consecutive year of placement in the lowest category of school performance. Now, we understand that that's a policy decision and perhaps actually likely a legislative decision as well, but we wanted to introduce that thought so that that would begin some discussion with the various policymakers. Of course, that includes everyone in this room, members of the General Assembly. I'm sure the governor's office would have an interest in it as well. Regarding then developing the revised accountability system that is required by HEA 1427, first of all, we did applaud the governor, the General Assembly, and certainly the superintendent for the memorandum of understanding that was signed about a month ago that set up the new accountability panel. We think this was an excellent step for affording transparency again in the process so that all the deliberations can be well understood, publicly vetted, and so forth before brought to you all. And then it involves extensive engagement of the education community, experts from the education community. And as Bill said, that was something that perhaps could have been more completely integrated in the first process that was implemented with the Bennett Accountability Rule. We also support, and in many ways, the General Assembly with House Bill 1427 showed great foresight. As we heard from many of the experts from the education community, they require that the new accountability rule rely more on student growth that's based on criterion reference measures and individual progress by students to proficiency. We heard that repeatedly from those that we interviewed, and by the way, we interviewed 19 total people, and so we felt we got a pretty good representative idea of what their mindset was on this issue. And also we feel that the accountability system should rely less on proficiency or simply test scores itself. So the inclusion of additional measures, especially with the elementary middle school model, would be appropriate. For example, the high school model, as you know, has 4 measures, and the elementary middle school model just relies on the test results. Further recommendations we would have going forward. Obviously, it's important to design an accountability system that's relatively simple. I say that with a little bit of a caveat. It's hard to design a system of this type that's simple, but to the extent it can be accomplished. Obviously, one that can be easily understood by not only the education community, but parents as well. And one that's equitable to all schools, recognizing that we have a variety of schools with various makeups of students. Probably one of the most important recommendations that we think we could make, that because of the complexity involved in implementing one of these systems, we feel that it's essential prior to full implementation to pilot the system. This would allow time to adequately perform various programming tests that need to be made, to solicit and receive feedback from schools, to evaluate the policy components that are incorporated into the system, and then to make appropriate adjustments as necessary. We understand that you had a discussion earlier this morning about the timing in terms of when the new system must be implemented, and frankly, the statute might not be clear on that point. We would envision a situation where practical implementation would mean that the earliest that you could implement the new system would be the 14-15 school year. And if that were the case, our suggestion would be that approximately this time next year, when you have awarded grades for schools for the current year, for the 13-14 academic year, then you would hopefully have your rule ready. It could be piloted immediately after issuing the 13-14 school year results. So then you can have an apple-for-apple comparison from the current system to the proposed new system, and I think that process would be well received by the education community and contribute to the efficacy of implementation of that new system. Finally, we recommended that the legislative branch on an ongoing basis have the capacity to perform analysis under the new accountability system. Specifically, we think that LSA should have access to the student data and desirably to the programming, the computer programming language as well, so they can provide answers to questions that legislators bring up with regards to the system and perform various analysis as well. So at this point, I think we're ready to take any questions that you might have.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for the combined idea of actually running two accountability systems at the same time. I think that meets both the spirit of what was contained in the MOU as well as meets what might be in the law. So that's kind of a nice little compromise there in the middle to go forth with. Anyhow, I appreciate your recommendations here and your findings, and I've had several opportunities to meet with you now, and the department was delighted to work with you to be sure that we were going to be able to go forth in a good fashion. Regarding the panel, your findings are driving us literally, quite literally, and so again, I thank you for your work. And questions from the board? Yes, Tony?
Is the current accountability system that we have in place now fair to schools?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, there's certainly areas of improvement in the model, and again, we made recommendations in that regard. You know, again, with the elementary middle school model, having the additional measures beyond just the single test scores would be helpful. We also think that the ability to measure progress towards proficiency, individual student progress towards efficiency, would be particularly helpful for those schools that have students in social and economic configurations that are challenging, and to recognize improved performance by those schools who are dealing with those populations.
Well, I'm going to press you a little bit on the question, 'cause I understand there's a million other ways that we could have probably put the metrics together and come up with different formulas and added this, taken that out. But for whatever reason, after over a year's worth of debate and discussion, we landed with this model. So is it fair to judge these schools by that? Because I'm getting somewhat of a mixed message while you're saying, well, it seems to be okay and functioning the way it was intended to function, but then on the other hand, you say, well, don't judge schools by this that are failing. I mean, if it's fair for everybody.
I think the reason why we suggested not taking over schools is because if there are questions about the credibility of a metric system, we did not, for instance, say you shouldn't judge schools based on this model. What we said is you might want to hold back on the ultimate high-stakes result until there's an opportunity to do more analysis and put the new system into place. We did criticize this model. We didn't say it was an unfair model. We simply said there are really two aspects to this. Number one, the model does not incorporate as much growth factor as John described, as first of all, Dr. Bennett and his people talked about. So there was a surprise there with regard to the educational practitioners and the educational community. And secondly, we believe that schools where there are demographic challenges need more growth factors built into the model. Now, in recognition of that, HEA 1427 does in fact do that. So we think you're on the right track, but if the question is, do we think the model is flawed in such a way that it should not be used, our answer would be no. We don't think it is unfair in that sense.
So
Correctly applied, not unfair.
how would we even define a community that should get the different standards? You said demographically, there may be some communities, someone's referenced somewhere, poor communities that shouldn't have to have the same, maybe standard.
We
How would
didn't, excuse me, let me interrupt. We did not say that there should be different standards, okay? There are simply models that incorporate, that apply to everybody, but they incorporate more growth into the metrics than this model did. And they include more growth to proficiency than this model does. That was, I think, pretty well agreed upon, and that's why HEA 1427 was passed that during this last legislative session. So we think you're on the right path to get there.
But you think it's possible to have a formula that gives added consideration based on demographics?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
I said that a model that incorporates more growth will give schools that have students who are starting below grade level, who are significantly below grade level, it will give those schools the ability to make progress and to get credit for that progress. That's really what we're saying.
So it'd be the same formula.
And that's true with that's true with models that are used in other states. Did I answer your question,
Yeah, and
sir?
I apologize. I'm probably mixing things I read in two different places. Something that from your report with something someone else said.
We're happy to answer your question.
And actually, let me add one thing too as well. No one we spoke to was against accountability system. Everyone is for accountability system. It's just an accountability system that best meets the needs of the state. So.
Two-part question, but the first part, with respect to the report, you noted that one of the things you found was that the department lacked the technical capacity to really meet the task at hand. Do we feel like that issue has been resolved, particularly if the board was to go down the path of saying we're going to use that same formula for the current data that's standing waiting, even if we were to bring the anomalies back before the board to deal with those separately? Is that technical capacity issue been resolved, or is it still there?
Good.
I'll take a first shot at this since I did more of the quantitative analysis, but my colleague certainly should speak to this as well. First of all, I would say that issue is squarely within the purview of the superintendent and her staff. But I would say that the analysis that we have where we've interacted on an analytical basis with the superintendent's staff, we've found them to be quite competent. And I think that's due to several things. Number one, she has competent people in there. Some of them are continuers who have been there in the past. As John and I have both dealt in analytical areas in our prior lives, one of the things that is better now, just because of time, is that the staff there has been able to work through some of these problems over the last 6 to 8 to almost a year. And in doing so, they've found problems, they've corrected things, they've become more comfortable with the analysis. So from my perspective, and John could speak to this, I feel they do have the technical expertise, but again, I would defer to the superintendent on that.
And just second part of this very quickly. If the board was to move forward on the current data, where we would say we're going to run, but what we're going to do differently is the anomalies are coming back here to figure out how to deal with them, is there anything that would hold up the ability of us or the department to issue ADA for the schools where there's no question that the formula works well, while we still deal with the anomalies? Because my concern is I don't want to get in another situation like we just had with ISTEP data where we waited, we only invalidated 1,300 scores and everybody else is waiting. I'm just wondering if we know this is going to happen, because it sounds like there are going to be anomalies, can we crank that data out and issue those grades and then deal with the anomalies with that understanding? I want to make sure that's, I don't know if it's a legal question, I don't know if it's a technical question, but I'm trying to find out, is there anything that would stop the board from doing that?
Well, we would be releasing, I can
Sure,
answer
please,
that
please.
actually.
I wasn't sure. Correct.
We'll be releasing preliminary data, like they said, preliminary grades.
Okay.
And there's an entire appeal process. If we wanted to release those that we're not quite sure about the configurations yet, we would notify those schools and we would be moving forward with that. There's nothing preventing us from doing that, because it's all going to be preliminary data going forward anyhow. And we're expecting, quite frankly, there's probably going to be a lot of appeals to look through as a result of things. So we have that capability. I would make comment regarding the staff that is in place, regarding accountability. Highly efficient and effective in their jobs. I've been blown away, actually, by what they can do. The system that is currently set up, and we're going to be talking to this in depth here, and Deb Daly, one of my experts, will be talking to you about the immenseness of the actual computer system calculations that we have in place to actually automatically place schools in categories, configuration categories. And so that's the point we'll want to have dialogue here this afternoon, because that's what we need guidance from you on. The report is correct in all its findings that says that we don't have a rule that encompasses what it is that we need to make decisions around. And so I am bringing it to you voluntarily, saying, I don't want to be making these policy rules at the DOE. It is your job to make these policy rules for us to go forth and do the calculations. But the calculation pieces are in place.
Let me ask you this, would LSA also have that same ability, and this is my thought, if DOE was to run them and LSA was to run them, would that allow us to create an accountability so that we're getting the same results running out of the two?
Well, actually, that was your last piece of
Right, it was. It's
recommendation.
last
I didn't hear it be said.
I just was curious if they
But
had
yes, we're going to do a check, or, it's recommended that we do a check. Actually, the department is more than excited about doing a check. That just makes sure that that what we are going to release is correct. It's been checked and double checked, and going forward.
So LSA has that same capacity, so we could look at that as an accountability.
Yeah, once we make MOUs with the group to exchange that data, we can do that.
I would like to comment quickly. I think the superintendent's covered it very well. I think one of our, again, from our first finding, and John, as John said, our first recommendation, transparency, transparency, transparency. It sounds like the superintendent is going to release the grades and say these are preliminary and let people react to that, and we think that is the right thing to do. So that gives transparency. And then I guess the other thing that we would say is don't let time be the enemy on these things. This is the second time through this. Let's take our time. Let's give people the opportunity to interact and work with it, practitioners to understand how the model affects them, and so on. And I think that will help we think that will help the credibility of the process and get rid of some of the angst and let people focus on very real progress that really needs to be made in education.
Dan?
Question,
Yes, sir.
you're not saying the first time through, schools didn't have the right to appeal?
Oh, no.
Okay, because they did.
We,
All right. So
no,
there
we-
was a back and forth. All right.
Well, there was a back and forth, but let me just, the back
You
and
just want
forth,
more time for it.
the back and forth didn't last.
I just
very-
wanted,
yeah.
I was
No. The appeal
in the
process.
sense, here's your grade, sit down, shut up, you took the test, here's your grade. That wasn't the process.
There was an appeal process,
Yes.
but, yes,
Okay, thank you.
more time.
And that's fine. I also want to make a comment about, because a few of us were here, went through the process of birthing this rather large program. If you've been around education at all, a teacher, professor comes in a classroom with a syllabus, you give your first final, you learn a lot. This is a massive classroom here with a lot of tentacles, unique situations. And it doesn't astound me at all. Matter of fact, we had planned on it that we would learn a lot. But we knew it was a bold move to be very clear to people where they sat in terms of the quality of their school, and it was a big move for Indiana. And I'm very thankful, frankly, a lot of teachers and principals, I think more satisfied probably on the upper grades. I think you would agree with that. They had a lot of input. We had various meetings, a lot of hearings and back and forth. So the first time out of the chute, I think it's key to hold on to the finding, it's all very plausible, and it was fairly administered. And certainly we'll learn more second time, and the third, and the fifth. That was one of my interest in consultants on the growth. I want to know how to do that appropriately so we keep everybody marching towards the same standard, because I don't know any children that, you know, I'm glad you grew a lot, but you can't do college math, so we have a little problem here. And so I want to make sure we understand exactly how to apply this growth method that does even include top performers, because there's good indication on international standards that our top students aren't maybe quite where we think they are. So frankly, this whole report, when I read it, sounded a lot like our discussions when we took the bold move to have A through F. You're recommending now look in the rearview mirror, maybe you should delay it some more months. But I think we're in a good place. I think we're down the right path. We've learned a lot. Frankly, past administration administered it fairly. It's all plausible. There were no special gifts given or taken. And now we will get better together. That's the message I hear. And I've, frankly, been through this over the years. Even my colleagues that worked on it as well could comment. But this sounds all very much like we thought it would play out, huh?
Yeah, I just want to comment that with all its problems, I still think it's probably better than No Child Left Behind.
Well, and then
I mean,
the other
our
labels
waiver
we had,
process,
yes.
I mean, I obviously didn't participate in the calls and whatnot, but it's my understanding that during the waiver process, that we didn't have a total free hand in putting that together. There were things that the Feds, U.S. Department of Education required go into that model. I remember them at least on one or maybe more than one occasion coming back asking that we tweak metrics in that model. So it wasn't like we just had a total blank canvas. We had a partner in the development of that accountability system with the U.S. Department of Education with the greater goal of getting the waiver and getting from under AYP, which we accomplished.
Thank you. Oh, you have more comment?
I was just going to say one thing. While we are critical to some extent of the former administration in the timing and in how they took this through, there was an appeal process, there was some back and forth, there was not enough to really build credibility out there in the field. The other side of that is, we've used this analogy, this is very much like beta testing a new piece of software. It's kind of like changing the rule book in the middle of Super Bowl halftime and trying to go forward. All eyes were on this, and it was very difficult to make this happen seamlessly. So there were a number of challenges as well, and certainly I think that comes out in the report as well. So again, to you all, we wish you well in the challenges that you have ahead. They're significant. We also thank you for the opportunity to present this.
Thank you very much. Thank you. On to the Glenwood Leadership Academy discussion regarding next steps. The rescore window for the applied skills closed Monday the 30th. And so we are going to be looking at any appeal pieces that came forth. And the board, it's at the pleasure of the board as to have a discussion here now regarding Glenwood. You've heard the recommendation from Gru Sheldrick, but we may decide to go ahead and set hearing dates and proceed with possible hearing dates once we get the final grade of Glenwood. Of course, we may not be able, if they don't have an F, then we can just cancel the hearings. But I'm open for discussion on how you see this working.
Linda?
Yes.
I believe we should set the hearings and have them ready to go if the score comes back as you mentioned. Do you have a timeline on when that grade will be available? Will that be next few weeks?
Yeah, well, now that we've gotten the windows closed, we'll be able to look at Glenwood specifically and do what we need to do
So
with that.
in a week or so,
Sure,
you think?
sure,
Okay.
yeah, we can be
So
getting
I-
going on that.
If it's appropriate, I'd like to make a motion that we go forth with setting public hearings in Evansville to look at Glenwood Leadership Academy. And if the grade comes back above the F grade, then we can cancel those public hearings.
Do you have a second?
I would second.
Any more discussion on this?
Those,
BJ?
I believe that those are statutorily required, right, to have those meetings, and at those points, just...
Yes, if the school has, yes, if the board's not taking any action to, well, statute, I guess, right now indicates that when you're in sixth year, then you need to have the hearings.
And then just for once we go through those hearings, at what point is there, I know there are several options that you can choose from.
Most definitely, and we went through several of those options in the last meeting when we had Glenwood actually here presenting. So there's a myriad of options, including having Glenwood with its current program, moving forward with what they got in place right now. Any more discussion?
When would the hearing be? What month? Would that be November?
Yeah. Yeah, I think what we're doing right now is having discussion on the actual motion to actually set up hearings. And then my department usually is responsible for making those recommendations for the hearing
Just
dates.
an estimate of, I was just curious.
I believe it has, correct me if I'm wrong, it has to be in October, is that right or is that wrong?
No, there's no hard date. It's after the grade is issued. I can try to pull up the statute.
Yeah, it happens after the grade is issued. And so I guess the motion is that if we go ahead and proceed with setting up dates, if we find out that the school is indeed an F, then we will do that. If it is not, then we will not do that. So I think I hear the motion actually giving flexibility, in actually after we have determined the grade in the interim, because we're not going to meet again until November. So it's appropriate for us to do something here today regarding this.
And it would require our attendance as a board to be there during the public hearings?
Not everybody needs to be present. Well, go ahead.
It takes a vote of 6
Yes.
of you all to make a decision, but the statute says that the meeting should be in the locality of the school. So
We don't have to physically be there.
if you
We
pass
can
any
read there.
participation, but there's a public hearing that's required for the board to be present. Go ahead, Michelle.
So the statute, as Bernice was saying, it specifically states that it needs to be held in the corporation in which the school is located. It doesn't state that all of the board members need to attend, but obviously it's an important issue, and usually there is attendance by department staff, board members, and of course the state board staff would want to attend.
In the past, that we had some representatives at the public hearings, and then a report was brought back to the full board, and the documentation of all the public comments were provided so that the board could make an educated decision to proceed from there. But it was not necessarily in the past that the entire board was at the actual public hearing. But the documentation was definitely, and then it was frequently live streamed too when possible, so that we could still, whether they're physically or not, could still be a part of the conversation.
And I think that's typical of any hearings that you
Right,
have.
right.
Yes. Any more discussion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. We're on to the consent agenda. You have 2 items, the common school fund loan applications and report on consolidated purchasing agreements, of which you received. A motion to approve.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. We are going to take a quick break here now to just gather our lunches, And let's resume the actual business. Yeah, how about we do let's do 1:10, okay? Give us some time to use the restroom, get breaks, and do whatever, and come back at 1:10. And IMath Science Cut Scores. Michelle Walker from the department. Michelle, wait just a moment. I think we're gathering everybody from outside. All right, I believe we're ready, Michelle.
Members of the board, I'm glad to be here to talk with you today about the recommendations that have come from the roundtable with regard to the science cut scores. And at your place, you should have three documents. One is a PowerPoint that I'm going to go over here in just a moment. The second item is a draft copy of what we call performance level descriptors, and I'll be discussing those with you as well. And finally, last but not least, the resolution that was passed last Wednesday by the Indiana Education Roundtable for your review. I do want to mention that I'm joined by a colleague from our office, Ben Kemp. I'll have him stand for a moment. Thank you, Ben. Ben is our science assessment specialist, and if you do have any questions about the content, as we're talking about some of the questions you might have after my presentation, I'll be glad to have Ben answer some of those for you. So what I want to do is get started and give you a little bit of background about this process. I know many of you are new, and even if you're not new to the board, we actually haven't done this process for quite some time. So it's a good chance for us to have a review for those of you who might be familiar. Obviously, ESEA, or No Child Left Behind, in other words, requires us to have assessments, and the one that we're talking about today obviously is science, and the requirement is that there is an elementary and a middle school science test, and Indiana has chosen grades 4 and 6. We use iStep and IMath to satisfy this federal requirement. Thought it might be helpful if I talked with you in a little bit more detail about the entire process, starting with what happened in terms of educators coming together. And I'm going to go into great detail about most of the process throughout the presentation, but just to give you an overview to get started. So educators participate in our cut score setting workshop, and they actually make a recommendation that's taken to the roundtable first and eventually makes its way to the Department of Education. So the upper right box, as you'll notice, again, last Wednesday, we presented at the Education Roundtable meeting, and the Roundtable has the responsibility to review the recommendations from the department, the recommendations from the educators that were on the committee, and the Roundtable's responsibility is to either accept one of those sets of recommendations or make a recommendation of their own, and that is then presented to you today. So now we're on the lower right. So the recommendation came in the form of a resolution. And the far left middle box, I guess I'll call it, which is in blue ink, that's what we're doing today. We're actually sharing those recommendations with you and the draft performance level descriptors for your review and action. Once we finish this process, if you do approve the cut scores today, then we will proceed with scoring and reporting of science scores for iStep and IMath, and they will both be released on October 24th. I want to give you some familiarity with the information that we share with the participants at our cut score setting. There have been roundtable resolutions that have been part of this process, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But for now, I do want to familiarize you with the definitions of PASS and PASS Plus. And I won't read these to you, but I do want to point out that the differences really are that PASS is considered solid academic performance. Again, these are roundtable definitions. And PASS Plus is considered exemplary academic performance. Again, this is something that we do share with the participants at the cut score setting so that they're aware of the definitions as they're working through the items that they're reviewing and expected student performance. So during our cut score setting workshop, which we actually use a process called the bookmark standard setting process, And some of you on the board might have even participated in one of these, and maybe some folks from the audience. But it's exciting because it's made up all of educators, and the department is really kind of the guide on the side. We're not participating in the process, but we do use a bookmark standard setting, and I'll talk about that again a little bit more as we go on. But there was a roundtable resolution in 2004, which really helped establish the process that we looked at on the slide prior that had the arrows, where we start with educators, move to the roundtable, they make a recommendation to your group, and then you have the opportunity to take action. So we did have 75 educators from across the state come and spend time with us in June, June 25th, 26th, and 27th. And they did represent expertise in content for science, and especially also for students with disabilities. If you're unfamiliar, IMAST is our modified assessment. And so students who are participating in IMAST, that's a case conference committee decision. It is students who are working on grade level, but for whom I-STEP was not appropriate. So again, we were looking for folks who had expertise in both science and students with disabilities. And certainly we want to make sure that we have a representative sample on all of these committees. And so one thing we do is we look at something called cells. So I want to give you just a quick, hopefully layman's explanation of how this works. So there are 3 attributes. One is geography, north, central, or south in terms of Indiana, the type of community, whether it's an urban, suburban, or rural, and then the degree of poverty or the socioeconomic status of the school. So 3 attributes combine to make a cell. So I gave an example here of a southern school that's in an urban area that has high poverty. That's 1 cell. And there are 18 cells in all when you do the combination of these. That's a good math problem. When you look at all of the different attributes and you combine them together, there are 18 different cells. What we do is we look at what percentage of the students in Indiana are in each of those cells. So we find hopefully the right number of folks to come and join our group for the workshop that represent, again, that percentage, just like the students. As I mentioned, our workshop was at the end of June. It was actually right here in downtown Indianapolis over at the Hyatt. So it was very close to for us since we work right downtown. And our vendor actually facilitated the process. This, again, is something that I mentioned a few moments ago, that the department is really the guide on the side, and the vendor does the facilitation, which includes some training. And I want to talk with you now about the process that the educators go through when they're a part of this workshop. Again, it is 3 days. It's 3 very intense days. I think their brains are hurting at the end, but it's just excellent professional development, and it's a really exciting process. So we give them what we call an ordered item booklet. And the ordered item booklet are test items that have been arranged in order from the least difficult to the most difficult. And that arrangement really is not an opinion arrangement. We don't ask teachers, the department staff don't weigh in on this. It's actually based on the statistics from students who took the test. So based on the spring 13 student performance on each item, we arrange them in a book called an ordered item booklet. Participants actually go through the bookmark standard setting process for 3 rounds. There's one caveat this year, which I'll get to in a moment. But what they're doing is they're talking about what is the knowledge, skills, and abilities that would be appropriate for a student to know and be able to do in order to be deemed pass, which again, back to the roundtable definitions, is solid academic performance, or pass plus, that exemplary academic performance. The bookmarks are always set as an individual, and I have that on this slide, and I really do want to emphasize that even though the educators have very rich conversation at their tables and across tables, every time they set their bookmark, it is definitely an individual decision. So the I-STEP grade 4 group did want to go to a 4th round. This has been the first time ever for us. So certainly we complied, and we're happy to do that, so we gave them another chance to set their bookmarks. Again, wanting to be transparent and share with you the process. They do have discussions throughout the process, as I mentioned, so they learn about what they're doing. There's training provided. I'll talk about that in a moment. They set a bookmark, then they talk to the colleagues at the table and within the room about why they placed their bookmark where they did. what's the difference between the item right before the bookmark and right after? How do they know that's the right place in terms of content? We do show them impact data, and I did share that with the roundtable, and I'll be sharing that with you today so you can see what the roundtable actually saw as well. And they have a final bookmark placement. We actually take the median of everyone's bookmark, so we don't average them together. We do take the median. We don't say that they all have to come to consensus on a bookmark placement because we really value their individual bookmarks, and so we do take the median. While they're there, the educators also work on this draft copy of the performance level descriptors that I referred to a few moments ago. And that describes what students should know and be able to do in each of those performance levels. We'll take another look at those in just a few moments. The cut score setting has a review during that time. So we have educators there, our vendor is facilitating the process, the IDOE staff is there to guide the process, and we also have experts from the assessment field who are with us. So Dr. Win-Win, he's from South Carolina. He is an expert in all things assessment. We've worked with him for quite some time. Very, very valuable to this process. Dr. Megan Carvinen, she's in Kansas, and she also is an expert on all things assessment, and she specializes in students with disabilities. So we felt like the two of them were a really good, what we call TAC, or Technical Advisory Committee. And we referred to them as our expert panel. And really their purpose at the meeting is twofold. One is to observe the process that's used by our vendor to ensure that best practice is being used, that fidelity and integrity are certainly woven into the process, and also to give us technical guidance with regard to the recommendations that are made by educators in terms of their bookmarks. We do have a formal meeting with the expert panel on the last day of the cut score setting so that we can review the bookmarks that were set, the median bookmarks, looking at the impact data. Our expert panel talks to us in very technical terms about looking at standard deviations, and they make a recommendation to us that we consider a technical recommendation. And I will be sharing that with you.
Before you go further, Michelle.
Sure.
In light of one of the parents who did a presentation
Yes.
this morning, could you just review why it is that we're looking at this now?
Absolutely. So kind of thinking back to the slide early in my presentation that had the blue arrows showing you the process. Again, we did the cut score setting review with the committee in June, and typically we would go to the roundtable in July or early August, and then have this presentation with your group at your August meeting. The roundtable actually didn't meet until last week, and so therefore we couldn't bring a recommendation to you until today. So it did delay us quite some time.
Of course, we had the high-step scores that were delayed
Right,
as well.
right.
So I just want to be,
Yep.
I just want some transparency
Sure,
on why we're
no.
doing this now.
Absolutely. Great question. What I want to spend the next few minutes talking about are the actual scores that have been recommended, both by the roundtable as well as the department and the educators who were there. I want to talk with you hopefully in layman's terms, not to get too technical or too much into statistics, but to give you some of the reasonings behind what's being recommended, so that when we have time for questions, you can certainly be prepared to ask any. The recommendations that you see here were part of the resolution provided to you in advance. So again, these are the roundtable's recommended cut scores for science in both IMAST and ISTEP at grades 4 and 6. What I'd like to do now is look in more detail at the ISTEP data, and then we'll look at the IMAST data. And I wanted to show you here, the roundtable actually did accept with no changes the DOE recommendation. And if you look at this chart, the bold numbers, there are actually 8 cut scores that you're going to be looking at today. Of those 8, the department only recommended a change in 3 of the 8. So 5 of them are exactly what the educators recommended as well. The other 3 are either a 0.5 standard deviation off or 0.6, and I'll explain that as we go. If you see a number in blue, which you'll notice on the Pass Plus grade 6, the blue underline simply is pointing out to you that that is one that did differ from the educators. So I'll talk again more about it as we go, but I wanted to point out that all the other numbers are exactly the same, and the minimum and maximum score of the test are on this slide, just to give you a little bit more information. So again, the roundtable recommendations are the first column following the grade, and there was only one recommended change, and that was a slight increase, as you'll notice, in grade 6 for Pass Plus. For IMAST, there were 2 recommended changes, and again, I will talk about the recommendations and the rationale behind those. But again, just want you to take a quick look at everything that is bold and black was the educator recommendation. And again, we did accept and move forward with 5 of the 8. We just made subtle changes in 3 instances. This is a picture of impact data. So this is what, if you're a participant at our cut score setting, this is what we would show you after round 2. Not because we're actually chasing a particular number or percentage, but just because we really do value transparency in the process. And so we want to give the participants an idea of, if we set the cut score at your median bookmark right now, what would our data look like? And so that's an example. And what you're actually looking at now is the final data. And I put on there for you where the cuts are, and you can see the percentages. The red is students who would be performing at the did not pass level. The green is Pass Plus, and then blue in between is pass. So everything above the red is passing, if you will.
And which data is that using?
And this is using the spring 2013 actual student data. So the cuts have not been recommended change whatsoever. Again, these are what your roundtable is presenting to you for your action. And again, educators and the department had the same recommendations for grade 4 ISTEP. We did have one change that we recommended. On the next slide, you'll see the grade 6 ISTEP. And we did recommend just a slight change in the Pass Plus cut. And the part of the expert panel's role is to really, again, advise us on the technical reasons why we would recommend any changes. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we talk through a lot of data and look at not only the impact data, but we look at the bookmarks, what scale scores go with those. And so there were actually 3 things that we talked about as a group with the expert panel with regard to grade 6 ISTEP. The first one was, their main concern to start with was the roundtable definition of exemplary progress. Exemplary student performance, they were a little concerned that the pass cut at 522 wasn't meeting the definition of what they considered as an expert panel to be exemplary. Again, we aren't chasing any numbers, but we are looking for consistency, that there should be a fair, I don't want to say line in the sand, because this is a very dynamic process that's all driven by content. And I think I've mentioned that already, but I just want to be very clear that we don't have a number in mind, we really don't have a percentage in mind. But part of what the expert panel says to us is, are there any content reasons why the recommendation from the educator should be accepted? And that's where we involve Ben, and he does a lot of work after the committee meets, looking at the performance level descriptors to see if, especially to see if the performance level descriptors that the educators created match where their cut score is. Because where the cut score is, everything above that should be something that's on your Pass Plus list. And if that was actually something that's on the pass list, then they've set the cut score just a little bit too high or a little bit too low. Also, we did look at, and I didn't put it on the slide, but I just want you to know that we did also look at impact data from spring of 12. And so, again, one of the questions the Technical Advisory Committee suggested that we think about is, do we expect to see fairly consistent performance from year to year? So these don't match exactly, but they are, again, fairly close to spring 12. So that was another concern that they had. So they really wanted us to think about, what does exemplary progress mean? Exemplary student performance. What about the percentages as we look at all 4 tests, both grade levels, ISTEP and IMAST, and you'll hear me talk about that again in just a moment. And then what other changes do we want to see, if any, based on what we've seen with performance and content? So what's interesting about this one is that we actually didn't move the bookmark at all from the educators. We simply just applied a 0.5 standard error again, based on the technical recommendation, so it's just a slight change. Again, the bookmark did not move from the educators. Now let's look at IMAST. So IMAST grade 4, we did move the bookmark slightly after we talked quite a bit about this one. Again, there was concern among the expert panel about the definition from the Roundtable of exemplary academic performance. So we did keep that in mind. We also looked at, again, over time, was there consistency with student performance from the year prior? Did we see, a similar pattern of what we think we should be expecting? And so again, they did recommend just a half of a standard deviation, so a 0.5, which is what we recommended to the Roundtable, and they accepted that. IMAST grade 6. This one is a little bit different, whereas the changes now down in the blue and red. The other two changes were between the green and the blue, and those were a plus half standard deviation. This one is minus, so we didn't make all of our changes going up. Some of them actually were in the reverse, and that's what you see here with IMAST grade 6. This one we talked a lot about with our expert panel, because this was one where we were really looking for content reasons why the did not pass group would be this large. And if we had content reasons, we certainly would stick with that. But what we noticed is that there were very many items in the ordered item booklet that actually were the same level of difficulty. So then we actually looked to our scale scores that matched the bookmark placement, and we did recommend a movement to the lowest number of that difficulty and then move forward. So we didn't actually change any of the expectations for students. We knew that the panelists, the participants, really didn't know that all those items were of similar difficulty, because again, we don't want them to make the decision based on that. We want them to decide based on what they're teaching, what they expect students to know and be able to do. But the expert panel was concerned that there were 8 items in a row that actually would result in a similar place on the scale. So they recommended to actually adjust for that. Again, just a 0.6 movement, which doesn't really sound like a lot. I mean, none of these were very large, but they were certainly technical advice to us. Yes, sir.
That's a quick question on this point. I just want to make sure I understand that, because if it's a test design issue, which is what I'm hearing, which is, sorry.
I think they want you to use your
If it's a
mic.
test design issue and you've got a situation where you have numerous questions, 8 questions, and you're setting a passing score for the state that's going to be in place, I'm assuming, for a few years, what happens as the test changes? Because I'm assuming they're going to remedy that. I mean, does that throw in question why we set why we moved it by a half of?
Well, what happens is we actually don't present every item from the test to the group. So for IMAST, for example, they saw 45 items in their ordered item booklet. iSTEP had 55 items. So we have to extrapolate from their bookmark to the entire set of items, and I'll talk a little bit about scoring with you this afternoon. So one of the things we noticed was they had set their bookmark at 18, but we noticed that all the way down to 10 had the same difficulty level. And so again, I think too also the expert panel thought, okay, if you're talking about solid academic performance, if they're demonstrating solid academic performance where this bookmark is in the DOE recommendation, then that should be what you move forward. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question the way you've asked it, but what I would say is that the ordered item booklet is a representative sample of the items in order from easy to most difficult. And again, looking at the educator recommendation, making sure that we're still in line with the difficulty of the items. And there were multiple bookmarks that actually resulted in a similar scale score. We also looked again at, just like we did with others, we looked at the data from 2012. The data from 2012 had a similar pattern to the one on the right. And again, not because we wanted to match it exactly, but we felt like we needed to be consistent since that's what we were seeing in the other grades and at the other pass and pass plus cuts. Let me go ahead and talk to you a little bit more about how we score the test and some information about performance level descriptors, and then you might have some more questions. So we actually don't score our tests on what's called percent correct. That's what a teacher does in the classroom. When I was teaching for 13 years, I had a grading scale and it was based on a percent correct. But we actually use something that's called pattern scoring, and I'd like to explain a little bit about that to you, again, hopefully in layman's terms here. So just like with ECA's iRead 3, both iStep and iMassed are pattern scored. And what that means is that we're actually looking at the student's performance on all of the items on the test. All of the easy items, all of the mid difficulty, and all of the difficult items, and combining all of that information together to result in a 3-digit scale score. So I'm going to give you an example in a moment to talk more about that. But what the scale score does is it demonstrates their entire demonstration of knowledge, skills, and abilities. And again, a number or a percent correct does tell you how many a student answered correctly, but it doesn't tell you as much about the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the student, which is why we use pattern scoring. So let's take a look at an example. If we have 2 students and they each correctly answer 20 items, and the first student correctly answers 20 of the most difficult items, whereas the second student answers 20 of the easiest items on the test, in a percent correct, both students would get the same score because they each have 20 items correct. In pattern scoring, we actually look again at the level of difficulty of the items and the entire body of knowledge that the student has demonstrated. And so in this case, obviously student number 1 would have a higher score because that student demonstrated more mastery of the content. I want to return now to those performance level descriptors. And again, one of the things that we look at with the expert panel in our meeting on the afternoon of the 3rd and final day is, do the performance level descriptors that the teachers created match where their bookmark is? And that's another reason, and I didn't get into great detail about that other than to mention that it's content-based, but making sure that if the teachers feel like these are the skills, if you look, for example, at iMassed Grade 4 Pass, or any of them that are in front of you, there's a description of what the teacher students should know and be able to do in order to be pass on the test. And so one of the roles of the department at that final day is to look at what the teacher said should be the skills and make sure that that's actually reflected in their bookmark. And then if not, to make adjustments. And again, that's what our advisory group, our technical expert panel is there for. So you'll see with all of those examples, the pass plus pass and did not pass descriptions. And this is actually something that comes to you for consideration. These don't go to the roundtable because if the roundtable makes changes in the cut scores that are presented to them, then we would need to alter those performance level descriptors before they come to you. So they are what the teachers did create is what you're looking at now. And what I'd like to do is go to the next slide and talk about your charge. So the action that we're requesting from you today is twofold. One is to approve the cut score recommendations that were part of the resolution you received from the roundtable. And the second is to approve the performance level descriptors that you've had a chance to review. And at this point, I'll turn it back over to Superintendent Ritz.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Michelle? Yes, Andrea?
Do all of the iStep tests, including social studies, language arts, and math, use the pattern scoring?
Yes, they do. All of the tests that we have actually use pattern scoring. Yes, indeed.
Do I have a motion to approve the cut score recommendations and the performance level descriptors presented from the roundtable?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? We'll take a roll call. Laura?
Yes.
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 Gordon Henry,
Yes.
Andrea Neal,
Yes.
Sarah O'Brien,
Yes.
Fred Oliver,
Yes.
Tony Walker,
Yes.
TJ Watt,
Yes.
Carrie Wicker,
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz.
Yes. 11-0, motion carries. On to the next new, thank you very much, Michelle.
Yes, thank you.
For all your preparation and your staff. We're on to A to F accountability, and we've given you some preliminary information, and I believe you also have a PowerPoint that is going to be presented to you. And Deb Daly is our expert, actually, at the Department of Education on accountability, scoring, and calculations. And she is going to present, and I would encourage you, most definitely, to be asking questions as we go through this presentation. It's a complex issue, and we want to be sure that we make sure that you understand anything that we might be presenting to you. I also will say to you that I'm not we're bringing this to you for your direction in both understanding the scoring, understanding issues in 11-12, and addressing decisions for 12-13 in the assigning of the grades. So I am coming to you for your decisions. All right.
Great.
Thank you, Deb.
Well, good afternoon, board members, and thank you for allowing me to come in and speak with you this afternoon. Again, my name is Debbie Daly. I'm with IDOE Information Services Department, and I wanted to come today and speak to you about the accountability decisions that are necessary for both 2011-12 and 2012-13 A through F. You do have several documents that you've been presented, and we'll refer to those documents as we're going through this presentation as well. So this presentation really does piggyback on the Grew and Sheldrake report, and we're just expanding on the findings that are listed within that report. So first we want to go over the issues that we found. First of all, there's 2 for 2011-12 and 2 for 2012-13. For 2011-12, schools considered by the IDOE to be negatively impacted by the 2012 policy decision to categorize schools with unusual grade configurations as elementary middle school. Again, we're getting into this partial high school configuration issue, and we want to go through some of those. Next, through 2013 IDOE and LSA review, it has been determined the removal of category caps for high schools during the 2012 A through F calculation does not comply with administrative code. The result, the omission of this category cap elevated 3 high school grades. For 2012-13 accountability, we do want to discuss category caps for both elementary, middle school, and high school. Again, transparency, we want to discuss the options that are available moving forward for 2013. Also, we do want to discuss schools with unusual configurations. Let's move now into the high school category caps. Again, 2013 IDOE and LSA review, it has been determined that the removal of the category caps for high school during the 2012 implementation does not comply with administrative code. The omission of the category cap for high school elevated 3 high school grades. Our options for this are to recalculate and republish 2012 A through F grades for the 3 affected high schools, or allow the schools to retain their original grades. Okay. And at the end of this, we'll turn this back over to Superintendent Ritz for further discussion. Schools with unusual grade configurations. I'm sorry.
If you don't mind, if you could also pull out, what we might want to do is actually discuss this in segments. Sure. If you don't mind.
No problem.
So let's do all 11 and 12 first.
Okay.
And you also received some papers that spoke to some concerns with schools negatively impacted. And so if you don't mind, can we break that up?
Sure, no problem.
I just sense among us that might be an easier thing to follow.
Certainly. So we want to start with the high school category caps, and again, you do have those 3 high schools presented before you in your documentation.
That would be great. So on the paper that you've given, it says removal of high school category caps. Have you found that document? Sent to you ahead of time. Looking for this document.